Okay, so this deep dive is going to be a fun one. This time, the stuff you sent us, it's, we're going to be kind of venturing into some seriously big questions, like the really fundamental stuff.
Yeah, this is going deep for sure.
So we're going to be looking at the, kind of comparing the metaphysical models of Nikola Tesla.
Oh, wow.
And also, Sufi teachings. So specifically we'll be referencing Ibn Arabi and Sheikh Nurjan Miramati, and we're going to set that against, well, we got to bring in Einstein, right? His theory of relativity. I mean, you can't really talk about this stuff without him.
No, absolutely not. It's going to be really interesting to see how those line up or don't.
Exactly. And as always, we're going to try to, make this stuff, digestible. We want to give you a good solid grasp of these different viewpoints without getting, too bogged down in the, super technical details.
Yeah, keep it clear and engaging.
Right. And looking at what you sent over, it seems like you're interested in, how these different models, they basically disagree on like the really core stuff.
The nature of reality type stuff.
Exactly. So we're going to be focusing on their core disagreements, specifically on like how they understood space itself, the fabric of space, and then the nature of the universe as a whole, how light travels, and then that big one, time.
All the big ones. Should be fun.
It's going to be fascinating. So, I guess the best place to start is, with the space that kind of holds it all, right?
Yeah. Makes sense. So right off the bat, you see this like really fundamental difference in how they understand space. So Tesla, he was totally convinced that there was this tangible thing, this medium that's everywhere that he called ether. And for him, it wasn't just like empty space. It was this like foundation for all forces and all phenomena, like even light in electromagnetic waves. They couldn't exist or move around without it, he thought.
So it's almost like he's saying there's a level of reality that's even deeper than what we normally see and experience, right? Like some kind of fundamental stuff that everything comes from.
Exactly. And he really pushed back against the idea that space could be curved. I mean, there's this famous quote of his where he says, "I hold that space cannot be curved for the simple reason that it can have no properties." It's almost like he was saying you can't bend nothing.
That's a great point. And it's really interesting how that kind of echoes what you were saying about the Sufi perspective, right?
Totally. Yeah. With thinkers like Ibn Arabi and Sheikh Nurjan Miramati, they talk about Bahr al-Qudra, which translates to the ocean of divine power. And this isn't just some like poetic metaphor for them either. They really see it as this, all-encompassing energy field, like the very medium that all creation is embedded in. So both Tesla and Sufism, they both point to this primary underlying reality, this foundation of existence.
So it's like they're both acknowledging that there's something more to space than just emptiness. It's got this active quality, this energy or power.
Right, exactly. And that's where you get this huge contrast with Einstein. Because
he famously rejected the idea of ether, right?
Exactly. He did away with it completely. Instead, his theory of relativity describes space as this four-dimensional fabric. We call it space-time. And it's totally dynamic. It can be curved and shaped by mass and energy. And that curvature, that's what we experience as gravity. So in his model, you don't need this underlying substance, this ether. Gravity is just a consequence of how space-time itself bends and warps.
That's such a mind-blowing concept. So basically we have Tesla and Sufism saying there needs to be this like fundamental medium, whether it's ether or the ocean of divine power. And Einstein's over here saying, nope, space itself is the stage, and it can bend and curve, and that's where gravity comes from.
It's almost like they're looking at the same cosmic play, but through completely different lenses.
Totally. Okay, so before we move on to talking about the universe itself, you mentioned that there might be some kind of bridge between Tesla's ideas and the Sufi view, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is where it gets really cool. So, how Tesla was talking about ether, right?
Yeah.
Well, he described it as a living vibrational medium. Like it's not static. It's alive. And it's in constant motion.
Oh, wow.
Right. And that's similar to how the Sufis see the universe. Describe it as this conscious, energetic, living thing. They're both saying it's so much more than just inert matter floating around in empty space. There's this deep sense of interconnectedness, like everything's linked together.
That's such a powerful idea. It's like the universe itself is participating in its own existence rather than just being a passive backdrop.
Exactly. And what's even cooler is that this could point to a deeper connection between science and spirituality.
Yeah.
Maybe they're both exploring different facets of the same underlying reality, like they're speaking different languages, but they're talking about the same thing.
I love that. It's like science and spirituality are two sides of the same coin. Okay, so we've talked about these very different concepts of space. So let's move on to the nature of the universe itself. Now, Tesla, he saw the universe as this living, conscious, intelligent entity, right? Not just a bunch of random parts, but something that's dynamic and, vibrant. He believed that everything was governed by these vibrational laws and that energy and consciousness were like the most fundamental aspects of reality.
Yeah. And for Tesla, that concept of consciousness wasn't necessarily human consciousness. It was more like this inherent responsiveness and interconnectedness within the fabric of existence. Like imagine this huge network that's always vibrating. Every little action has a ripple effect throughout the whole system. It's a very different picture from Einstein's universe, which is kind of detached and geometric.
So it's like comparing a living, breathing organism to a perfectly crafted machine.
That's a great analogy. And Sufism, well, they take this idea of a living universe even further. They describe the cosmos as this intricate living organism created by God. And this is where things get really interesting. They have this concept of insani kamil, which means the perfected being. Now, this isn't just some abstract idea for them. They describe it as this universal soul. It's this universal consciousness that contains the ocean of divine power that we talked about earlier. Imagine it as this central node or focal point. It's through this perfected being that the divine will and energy flow out to sustain all of creation. And they believe it's happening through this continuous, praise and vibration.
It's like the perfected being is this conduit or like a central hub for the divine to interact with the universe.
Exactly. It's considered a real living dimension.
Okay.
And within this dimension, there are these divine tajalliyat. Think of them as like specific qualities or facets emanating from the ocean of divine power. So knowledge, for example, would be a manifestation of this fundamental energy, and mercy would be another. It's how these abstract concepts become real and tangible in the world.
That's a really beautiful way to think about it. So again, we see this recurring theme of the living conscious universe with both Tesla and Sufism, right? It's like the universe itself is alive and participating in its own existence.
Right. It's not just this passive stage. And this is where Einstein veers off in a totally different direction.
Because for him, it's all about the math and the physics, right?
Exactly. Einstein's model is all about impersonal structures governed by the laws of physics and the geometry of space-time. There's no need for consciousness or divine will in his scientific framework. It's just pure physics and math describing how matter and energy interact. It's kind of humbling to think about, two completely different ways of seeing the same universe.
It really makes you question, how much of what we see is just our own interpretation. But you were saying there's still a point of connection here, right? Something about divine power.
Yes. Even with these seemingly opposite views, there's this shared idea that the universe is a manifestation of this divine power. Tesla's conscious vibrating universe and the Sufi concept of the perfect being both point to this idea that divine energy and consciousness are woven into the fabric of reality.
So they're not necessarily contradicting each other. It's more like they're describing different aspects of the same underlying truth.
Exactly. They're offering different perspectives on the same reality.
Okay,
so now let's move on to how light moves. Tesla, he was adamant that light needed a medium to travel through space. He just couldn't wrap his head around the idea of waves moving without something to carry them. And that medium for him was the ether. He saw it as this carrier wave for electromagnetic energy, which was essential, not just for light, but also for something he was really passionate about, wireless energy transfer.
It's amazing how his ideas are still so relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. And what's really cool is that Sufism has a very similar concept. They describe divine light as moving in waves through the ocean of divine power, reaching every part of creation instantaneously. But here's the key difference. These waves of light are not random. They're intentional. They're like structured manifestations of divine will.
It's like the universe is being intentionally illuminated.
Exactly. And they use this really beautiful analogy. Think about Wi-Fi signals, right? You need a receiver to pick them up. Well, in Sufism, it's the same with divine light. It's everywhere, but you need a receiver to perceive it. And that receiver is a purified heart and purified senses.
Wow, that's such a powerful image. So for them, light isn't just some physical phenomenon, it's a living reality. It's moving by divine command, and you need to refine yourself inwardly to really perceive it.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
So both Tesla and Sufism, they're emphasizing that light needs this medium to travel. But as you said, this is another point where they clash with Einstein.
Big time. One of the most famous postulates of Einstein's theory of special relativity is that light can travel through the vacuum of space. It doesn't need any medium at all. And he said the speed of light in a vacuum is this constant. It doesn't change no matter what. The source of the light, the observer, their motion, none of that matters. Light just goes through the fabric of space-time itself, not through some separate ether.
That's such a huge departure from what Tesla and the Sufis were saying. It's like a fundamental difference in how they understand how energy and information move through the cosmos.
Yeah. And again, it's important to remember that Einstein's theory has been experimentally validated, countless times. But even with these differences, there's still an underlying principle that connects them. Tesla's ether and the Sufi ocean of divine power, they both act as this carrier, this conduit for light and energy.
It's not about the specific mechanism then, it's about the principle of needing something to facilitate the movement or the manifestation of light and energy.
Exactly. And there's another cool connection. Tesla had this idea of resonance, where you can tune into specific frequencies in the ether to transmit and receive energy. That sounds a lot like the Sufi idea of purifying the heart and senses to receive divine waves, right? So again, different languages, but similar concepts.
It's about alignment, about being in the right state to perceive and interact with those energies.
Exactly. Okay, so you're ready to tackle the big one. Time.
Bring it on. Let's talk about time. So Tesla is pretty clear about his stance on time. He saw it as absolute and fixed a constant force that nothing could alter. He believed that time just is what is unchanging. He even considered the possibility of instantaneous energy transfer, where energy can move from one point to another without any time delay. And he was very critical of Einstein's theory of relativity. He just didn't buy it. He saw it as this mathematical abstraction that wasn't grounded in the fundamental reality of energy and vibration.
And it's fascinating how Sufism also has this understanding of divine realities existing outside of our normal perception of time. They have these three levels of time. First, there's time reality. They call it mulk. That's our everyday experience of time. The ticking clock, the linear progression of moments, past, present, future. But then there's timeless, which they call malakut, or the world of light. This is a metaphysical realm where time, as we understand it, just doesn't exist. It's a realm of pure being, pure presence, where you can directly experience the divine.
So it's like stepping outside of the flow of time as we know it.
Exactly. And then there's the ultimate level, timelessness. Iradatullah. This represents the realm of God's will before the creation of the universe. It's the realm where time is totally irrelevant.
So even though Sufism acknowledges our everyday experience of time, they're also saying that there are these deeper, timeless dimensions of reality. And of course, this is completely at odds with Einstein's view.
Absolutely. Einstein's theory of relativity was revolutionary because it basically said that time and space are not absolute. They're relative. How you measure them depends on where you are and how fast you're moving. It all depends on your frame of reference. This means that there's no such thing as absolute simultaneity. Two events that appear simultaneous to one observer might not be simultaneous to another observer who's moving at a different speed or in a different gravitational field.
So for Einstein, time is fluid and flexible. It's not fixed and universal, like Tesla and Sufism believe.
Right. It's all relative. So we have this really interesting situation here. Tesla and Sufism both leaning towards the idea of absolute time, and Einstein saying, nope, it's all relative. But even with this disagreement, there's a potential point of connection that I find really intriguing.
What's that?
So remember how Tesla talked about instantaneous energy transfer? This idea that energy could somehow bypass the limitations of time. Well, that aligns in a really cool way with a Sufi belief in realms that exist beyond linear time. Both of these ideas suggest that there might be laws or dimensions of reality that transcend our normal experience of time and space. Maybe our everyday understanding of time is just one limited aspect of a much bigger picture.
So maybe time isn't the ultimate ruler we think it is. Maybe there's more to it than we can currently grasp.
That's a great way to put it. I think that's one of those fascinating things about this whole discussion. It forces us to really question our assumptions about the nature of reality.
We've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, and I think it might be helpful to do a quick recap, just to really highlight the key differences between these perspectives. You included this really helpful comparison table in the material you sent over.
Yeah, that table's super useful.
So to recap, when it comes to space, Tesla and Sufism both say there's this fundamental medium, right? Ether for Tesla and Barul Qudra, the ocean of divine power for Sufism. But Einstein says no, it's all about the dynamic fabric of space-time.
Yep. Big difference there.
Then for the universe itself, Tesla and Sufism see it as this living, interconnected reality, while Einstein's model is all about structure and geometry.
More differences.
And then there's light. Tesla and Sufism both agree that light needs a medium to travel. Einstein says no, it doesn't. And finally, time. Tesla and Sufism say it's absolute. Einstein says it's relative.
Yeah, that table really drives home how fundamentally different their worldviews are.
It really does. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's safe to say that we've explored some pretty mind-blowing stuff, right? We've looked at Nikola Tesla's ideas, Sufi metaphysics, and Einstein's theory of relativity, and how they clashed on some of the most fundamental questions about reality. It's clear that they have very different ways of understanding the universe, and even if we don't have all the answers yet, I think grappling with these different ideas can really enrich our own understanding.
Definitely. And it brings up some really important questions for you, the listener. How does your own experience of time and space align with or maybe challenge these viewpoints? What resonates with you the most? What feels true to you?
That's a great question. And to leave you with one final thought-provoking idea to ponder, we keep coming back to this theme of a conscious universe, right? And this idea of a fundamental underlying medium like the ether or the ocean of divine power. Could it be that our current scientific models, with all their incredible achievements, are missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, a piece that thinkers like Tesla and spiritual traditions like Sufism have been trying to point to all along? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.
Until next time.
See you then.